Welcome to Brain Strength. This is a series where this average jabroni decides to teach you a thing or two about sports psychology, and along the way demonstrate some stuff, give you some ideas of how to take it into your sport, into the weight room, and maybe do a few athletic things every now and then. I'm your host, RJ Lynch, mental performance consultant, my master's in sports psychology. Let's get this rolling. So this episode of Brain Strength, we're going to be focusing on mental toughness. And if there's going to be an episode where I'm going to piss some people off or get a lot of hate in the comments if anybody actually watches this video, it's probably going to be this one. Because there's a lot of people out there that have built businesses, ideas on faking mental toughness by saying they can do something with ideas that aren't exactly true all the time. So to get started, let's look at some of the things that people do right now to create mental toughness that might not actually do it, or some beliefs that are held that should really be broken down before we can truly understand mental toughness and help our athletes, help ourselves if we are the athletes, get to a more mentally tough space. So to start off, the one I always like to go with is understanding that athletes aren't soldiers. Now, some athletes that we may coach, some athletes out there listening right now, maybe you were a former soldier, ROTC member, whatever it is. But mental toughness in athletics and mental toughness for soldiers are two completely different things. As we'll get down to it later, it comes down to what goes into mental toughness and understanding that it doesn't always translate from one scenario to the other. So just taking yourself through or putting your athletes through this single one-day Navy SEAL style training, it just doesn't work most of the time. Part one, because it's one day, and to make actual changes in the brain, you usually need multiple sessions. And two, the stuff isn't specific enough to the sport to really make a difference in whether or not an athlete can now perform under pressure here or there, because it's just not how things go. In the military, they have special resilience trainers. They have people that design things to make their mental toughness specific to getting shot at, to being in enemy territories, all these things. And the military is actually one of the biggest employers of master's levels sports psychology students. So if the military is taking these ideas from sports psychology students, but you are only getting your stuff from someone who was in a couple camps just doing the things, there's a disconnect here. So all the respect to everybody who served, all that. I've had plenty of family members in there, plenty of friends, so I don't mean to disrespect anything there because they are some of the most mentally tough people, but that does not mean it's going to translate right to sport. It doesn't mean that what they teach is going to help you take a free throw shot at the end of a game or make that serve when the game is tied in the last set. The next thing that I see a lot or have heard a lot when people are trying to coach mental toughness, especially with old school coaching, is this idea of just grueling, continuing to go, go, go. No rest, no water, don't be weak, da, 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 all this kind of stuff. They borderline torture their athletes. And you're not building mental toughness, you're just torturing. Because if you don't hydrate, if you don't rest, you're probably going to break before you are mentally tough. Your body's just going to give out on you. And no matter how much you're willing to push through, you're not going to be able to. The next thing is we put athletes in these situations to just continue to push through adversity, go through things. But some of them don't have the coping skills, don't have the things that make them resilient, that make them believe that they can get through it before we put it through. So before you even get into the mental toughness side, you have to make sure that the athlete has the skills to cope with whatever adversity comes, to cope with the stresses. Because otherwise, once again, it just leads to injury. It leads to burnout. It leads to your athletes just quitting and saying, you're a BS coach. I'm going to go over here. Especially nowadays when you have so many AAU sports where they can pick and choose where they want to go. You have to make sure you don't just chase your athletes away. Next up, kind of relating to the second point, is mental toughness requires a certain degree of safety. Because if we get to the point where we're just pushing athletes to do more and more, push through this injury, push through this soreness, once again, we break them, or we just convince them that, you're fine, when they really aren't. just ends in career injuries, all these things that we don't want. And it's hard to be mentally tough when you're laying on the sidelines with your leg in a brace. Then finally, everyone's different. Every situation's different. Every scenario in life where mental toughness might be important is different. For some people, if they have a tough home life, all this stuff, sport, they can be mentally tougher there because they already have to be mentally tougher at home. It just translates for them. Others, because they have to be so mentally tough at home, they can't exude the energy in their brain to be mentally tough on the court, on the field. And vice versa, some people have very little stress at home, are weak there because they don't go through stresses. Then they get on the court or the field, aren't used to being in stressful situations, so they can't be tough there. While others will be a spot where, because they don't have to exude any mental energy, any physical feeling, don't have any stresses coming from home, it's easier then to focus all the coping mechanisms on what's happening in a sport. So understand everyone's different. If you're just trying to train everybody the same, and if you're trying to train yourself the same as someone else, it's not always going to work. So from a science basis, what does mental toughness really mean? What does it look like? Mental toughness at the end of the day is the ability for an athlete, for a person to perform at a high level near the best of their ability despite adversities and other issues that are present. So whether it is rainy fields, bad referee calls, exhausted from a hard week of practice, how can we keep pushing through to still perform at the best of our ability and not give up and not let our brain defeat us? To reach this state of ideal mental toughness, there's a couple of main things that go into it. Going back to the mental competencies I've mentioned in the past, had my video on, it really comes down to a combination of resilience, confidence, focus, motivation, and stress management. So resilience has the obvious link to mental toughness. Most people often interchange them even though they're not the same. Mental toughness is to keep moving forward, where resilience is the bounce back ability. This is something where you build up the idea that, man, I just had that tough call. How do I get back from it? Versus you have several bad calls in a row. How can I keep playing the game the same way? Confidence is something that we build to believe not only can I survive if I keep pushing, do I have the belief that if I get knocked down, I can get back up, but also the confidence that you can do something to begin with. If you're in a game where you don't believe you can win it, if adversities start rising, it's just going to create that confirmation bias that I was right, I can't win this game, the refs are against us, the field's all torn up, the court's extra slick, my shoes are untied, I can't get through it. I don't believe in it, it's not going to happen. So there's multiple kinds of confidence in there. Focus, you have to have that concentration, you have to be focused on what you're doing to want to keep moving through it. If you are worried about what's going to happen when you get home or about that test that you're taking tomorrow and not about the game that you're in now or the practice that you're in at that moment, it's going to be harder for you to then push through any adversities that rise because your brain is elsewhere. Motivation. This is really the point where I was talking about how different scenarios have different types of mental toughness and how not everything translates. If you're in the military, part of the reason you're so mentally tough is if you're not, you get shot, you don't make it out alive. You're probably pretty motivated to continue through the adversity, to keep going if you know the opposite of that is death. In sport, the situation isn't as intense. It may feel very intense at times, but usually it's not a life or death scenario. A morbid joke that I've made prior is the Germans who lost to Jesse Owens in the Olympics didn't lose their lives. So there's probably a good chance that you won't lose your life if you lose the competition. So just knowing that, you're going to be a little less motivated than someone who's in a life or death scenario. But going back to sport, the more motivated you are to win, to do this thing, to complete this practice, the more your goals are aligned with what you want to do, the easier it is to be mentally tough in that scenario because you really care about it. And then lastly, you have to have some level of stress management. The adversities you're going through are creating stresses on your body, and if you're not used to handling them, dealing with them, lessening them to the point that you can function, then you just won't do it. So the benefits: you've put in this work, you're more confident, you're more resilient, you're more motivated, all these things are there, you're mentally tough. What does this really get you? Well, you're able to handle unfavorable circumstances. I can't think of many games, many competitions in my life where there wasn't some kind of adversity. Going back to refs making bad calls, running into headwinds, opponents gain tailwind jumps versus nothing for you, raining, snow, bad surfaces, all these things happen. And the more mentally tough you are, the more you're able to just perform at your best and kick butt while others might falter. The more you do and push through and survive, the more that confidence grows. So while confidence is a part that goes into mental toughness, by being mentally tough, you also increase confidence for later on. If you survive a game with 5 bad calls, it's easier to survive the one with 6, 7 bad calls. Just because you've done it, you know, like, okay, we can come back from this. All right, now we got 1 or 2 more, we could still come back from this. It's just that increased confidence that goes along the way. Next up, there's just more reliability and trust. And this specifically comes from the coach-athlete relationship. If a coach sees a player that can perform under pressure, can be mentally tough, they're more likely to put you in scenarios where the mental toughness is required. You're in that final 5 of the rotation during a basketball game. You know, you're in the last bits. If coach knows you're going to nail your free throws over this person that might be a better athlete than you, but tends to choke on the line at these moments, they're going to put you in. And then you're just going to become a bigger focus, and you're going to get that play time later on because the coach knows they can trust you. They know they can rely on you. And this just goes along the lines of the more you do something, the more you can trust yourself, the more you can be trusted by your teammates, all these things. So how do we build mental toughness? How do we actually target those main competencies and get ourselves somewhere? One of the biggest things that I see that just helps get us set right, because if you go into a competition, if you go into a practice and your brain is all over the place, you're already more susceptible to other negative things coming in. So finding some way to focus at the start, to narrow in at the beginning, just sets you up to be more mentally tough without worry about anything else. So one of the easiest things to start with is the pre-performance routine. Very similar to superstitions we might hold, pre-performance routines usually do 2 things. By doing the same thing or a similar thing before every competition, you kind of know, like, okay, this is my transition from out of sport life to sport, and now I'm going to perform because I've done all the things necessary to be prepared, and my mind's also focused. So this can look like just taking some breaths before practice. If you have weights or so that you're doing, so if you're in the weight room, you'll see a lot from power lifters or any Olympic lifters. They might have the specific foot that they step forward, the shake, something like this. Which hand do they grab with? How they breathe and set the now times they bend their knees or so, because that just kind of sets them up, gets their mind focused for that big pull that they might have to make or whatever they have to do there. So that's one thing you do. Find that pre-performance, that thing that mentally gets you focused, mentally makes you feel good, makes your body feel ready. Might be shakeouts, jumps, whatever it is, to know, like, oh, my legs do function. The next thing is to practice pressure. This is what most coaches or a lot of coaches have been starting to move towards to some degree, though not all the time. They do try to add in here or there. So what does practicing pressure might look like? It could mean bringing in a bunch of people from a different team at your school to cheer, to yell at you during free throws, during free kicks, anything like that. It could mean putting constraints on a drill, making things more difficult here or there. Instead of always running your practice with the wind, make sure when it's howling and going against you one day, can you run against it? But all of this is also done within a space that, once again, is safe. It's one thing to run up a hill that's a little slick versus one that's a complete mudslide. And then once again, making sure that your athletes have the proper equipment. Are they running in flats that are just going to slip, fall, twist feet? Do they have spikes that actually dig into the ground a little bit? So it might be a little slicker, but still safe to run up. And then the next piece to practicing pressure, doing things that might push the brain a little bit, is also layering it. So what do I mean by layering your pressure, layering your adversity? Well, I'm going to use the example from a weight room. I'm going to choose an exercise that I know a lot of people either love, hate, somewhere in between, in the Turkish get-up. So with the Turkish get-up, I'll demonstrate a bit, but the idea is you start on your back. You have one kettlebell, one dumbbell, one barbell, whatever it is in your arm, and you're trying to stand all the way up, come all the way back down. It's an exercise that I find for a lot of athletes. They don't like, partially because no matter what weight you really have, it feels heavy. So how do I increase my confidence? How do I increase my belief that I can do it? I start light, do the full drill. So I take the weight that I know I can do, and work my way all the way up. Now for me, because I've done this with a lot heavier weight than that, I know I can move up and I'm going to be just fine doing it. But for the athlete who struggles with the adversity, struggles with the fact that it's very uncomfortable, that feels bad against their arm, that feels bad standing all the way up, they're not going to want to jump up the next week, even though it would take them a lot of work to make that actually feel like anything structurally for the body. So what do I start with? What would I advise to build a little of that confidence, build a little bit of the mental toughness? Break it into pieces. So at first it might just be hold it here, like talk to, you good? Yeah, I guess. All right, now I just want you to do the first motion. So I might just have them come up here. Then they might go down it again and again until they feel like, you good there? Yeah, it's still heavy, but I'm good. Then I move them up to the next motion. Have them hold it for a bit, be there, know like, yep, you're gonna survive, come through. And at this point, I just look at him like, just stand up now. And then what you know it, you're there. And that just slowly builds that confidence. It's building the pressure. It goes from, if you don't do this drill, we don't move on to the next, to if we don't do this, then we don't get to go home, things like that. Instead of just putting them in the most pressure-filled, the heaviest, most uncomfortable position to start. And then the next piece to that kind of relates is setting goals and finding the right motivation. So all I did there to build the confidence was I set little miniature goals. Do this, and now you're here, now you're good. The more you accomplish, the more you hit these little milestones, the better you go. Sorry, gotta take a minute to breathe here. And along with goal setting is motivation. The more motivated you are to eventually get here, like if I can justify, like if you do X amount of weight here, you're going to be X amount of times better in your sport, and they really care about their sport, it's going to be a lot easier to set those goals, hit that spot. With mental toughness, you have to take one step at a time until you're walking out that door and you can walk into the adversities that are coming through without the fear that you once had taking that first step. Next up, you have to reflect. After you get through something tough, look at it as like, hey, I survived hell. I could survive other things. And then lastly, find support. You very rarely have to do this stuff on your own. Find people that can motivate you, find people that can help you. There's a lot of strength coaches out there that are going to do great things for you. There's a lot of good other coaches out there that'll do things for you. Let them be those people that can tell you, like, you're a badass, you can keep going forward. So find the support, find people that are going to help you feel confident, focused, motivated, that can take some of that stress for you. So at the end of the day, mental toughness is something that coaches always love to talk about, something that athletes love to look up. And there's a lot of people out there charging a lot of money for single sessions that, unfortunately, I'll tell you now, usually don't work. And even if you want to have them come for multiple, take 4 weeks of this ex-Navy SEAL training to make you mentally tough. It might make some effect after 4 weeks, but for the cost you just paid for that, both your strength coach and a mental performance coach are going to be pissed at you because A, the stuff that they were having you do messed with the strength coach's training, and B, the mental performance consultants kind of look at you like, we could have done this a lot different and probably had better results for less money. So just some things to look out for. So until next time, if there's anything I said today that offended you, I hope you can forgive me. And if there's anything that you say in the comments that offends me, know that I'll probably forgive you for that. So until next time, brain strength out.